This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Wendy Gonzalez. And Wendy is the CEO of Sama, the provider of accurate data for artificial intelligence for 25% of the Fortune 50 companies, including Google, Microsoft, and Walmart. A study by MIT found that Sama has hired tens of thousands of Africans and paid 4 times higher than the competitors. In a time when many employees are feeling unsupported by their leadership, Wendy and her team seem perfectly in sync when you look at their milestones, like raising $84.8 million in venture capital, lifting more than 65,000 people out of poverty, and making the Inc. 5000. The biggest reason behind the harmony with her team, well, Wendy regularly steps out of her own shoes and looks at her performance objectively to see how she's affecting her team. When others are stuck in their ways, Wendy is quick to adjust to create the environment her team needs to put their best ideas forward. So, Wendy, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Thank you, Steve. Pleasure to be here.
So why don't you start with just give us a little context, where you grew up, where you went to school. I did see you're a University of Washington alumni, which is awesome because I'm just a little west of Seattle. And so give us a little background about, your formative years and your journey so far.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I am a Washingtonian by birth. So
Okay.
um my parents immigrated to Seattle. My dad worked for Boeing for 30,000, no, 30,000, 30 plus years.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but I was gonna say 30,000 feet, but
Yeah,
grew up
yeah.
in the area, went to University of Washington. So I'm a very proud Husky and watched the game
Yeah.
this weekend. But yeah, I started my career in consulting. So I joined Ernst and Young, had a great time traveling around the world, helping large companies figure out how to, basically leverage the latest technologies and how to deploy them effectively within their organizations. And then traveling was tough. So I switched over. I worked for a couple of public companies and IT leadership programs, co-founded a startup in the IoT space, but all along that time, had a few children. So we had 3 kids. They were a young age, and I really started to kind of take a step back and say, like, what are we doing this for? Like,
Yeah.
why, are we kind of working to make this all happen when there's so much more that we need to do to kind of get the world into a better place? And then my father passed away unexpectedly, kind of out of the blue, and it sort of was a bit of a wake up call to say, hey, I really need to pursue something that I think is going to be meaningfully to me as an individual, which is really about how do we make the world a better place, for lack of a better word. How can we contribute to society in a different way, and that how can I take my chops in business and translate that into impact that I'd love to see in the world? So I decided to pursue looking for different social enterprises, and I actually left the startup I co-founded just to go do that. So I left,
Wow.
joined uh, a small nonprofit at the time called Sama Source. I joined our founder, whose mission really spoke to me, which is really about creating financial independence, to level the playing field for people who have big barriers to employment, because everybody has something to offer. And when you can create financial independence, that's when societies are uplifted. So
Yeah,
long-winded
it's
intro, but
no.
that was the idea.
It's awesome. I mean, it's just amazing to me that someone that has been as successful as you and been in the corporate world and then the startup world, and you're doing well, at least from corporate success wise, perhaps. Uh, but then you decide to do something very different, do something that means more to you and gives you more perhaps impact in how to change the world, so to speak. It's impressive, and I think a lot of people are afraid to make that move. It's I think it's a big one.
Yeah, it definitely is, and it was actually a discussion I'd had with my husband, where I was like, hey, we're constantly telling our trying to walk the walk with our small children, and it's like, hey, you see a piece of trash on the street, well, you pick it up and you throw it in the garbage. These are all the different things that you need to do. And it was kind of like, well, wait a second, we spend so much time on our work. It's so kind of intense. How do we then parlay that into something that can be our day job? So we were kind of tired of being weekend warriors, trying to figure out places to volunteer and contribute. It was like, wait a second, maybe we can actually combine these together. So yeah, it
Hmm.
was definitely a family decision, because I'm like, it's not going to pay the same as a corporate job does for sure.
Yeah, for
So are
sure.
we okay taking this risk? But I felt really glad that we made the decision as a family, and I'm thrilled. I don't think I could ever go back.
That's awesome. Now, where did your parents immigrate from?
They immigrated. My dad was from outside of Hong Kong, and my mom, I think, outside of Tianjin. But they actually met in Seattle. So my mom
Mm.
was going to Seattle University, and
Yeah.
my aunt was going to University of Washington, and they met in Seattle.
Oh, that's awesome. Excuse me. And you work or you live and work in the Silicon Valley now, is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I met my future husband when we were consulting together, kind of traveling around the world, and I was like, okay, it's time for us to hunker down and settle. And he was living in San Francisco at the time, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
like
great.
not too far away from Washington. So I moved down here.
Okay. Well, so tell us a little bit about the founder of Sama. She was an amazing person and created something that obviously spoke to you. So tell us a little bit about her and what you hope to continue on with her legacy.
Lila was incredible. So Lila Jana founded Sama back in 2008, and so she herself also was a child of immigrants. Her parents both came from India. She ended up growing up in Los Angeles, and did well, and in school, was getting ready to go to Harvard, got a scholarship. And while a lot of people might go on spring break, she was like, I'm going to use some of this scholarship money, and I'm going to take a trip to Ghana in West Africa to teach English. So she
Wow.
had
Okay.
always been kind of, really focused on, hey, how can I be part of this like global community? And when she got there, she was totally astonished to basically find that there was so much incredible talent. Like the kids that she was teaching English to, um, listened to the BBC and knew more about, what was happening in US politics than some of her classmates did. So she kind of took that away and was like, okay, wow, this is incredible. She ended up studying development economics and African studies at Harvard, and went to go work for the World Bank, and said, okay, hey, this is a way to affect change. But that is a really, they do a lot of good in the world, but it's a very big machinery. So she decided to leave there, go consulting, um, and recognize that she was working on I think, a project for an outsourcer, that, here were people who were, um, doing call center work for, British Airways and some of these other areas. And she was like, well, wait a second, what if we connect the dots? Could we create this opportunity where, instead of just doing general outsourcing, which is usually predicated on, do you have previous experience? Do you have a degree? And actually is sort of flipping that model on its head, because there's so much incredible human capital, human talent. And from her experience in Africa, she's like, wait a second, there's a way to connect the dots, because the World Bank, we're trying to alleviate poverty, right? But what's the real way to alleviate poverty? It's through financial independence. So why not create an opportunity where there's a purposeful hiring model? So the way that we level the playing field, and Sama means equal in Sanskrit, is instead of hiring just on the basis of you've graduated from a top university, you have previous work experience, you actually worked with people who've got the greatest barriers to employment, which are women and youth in underserved communities. They may not be able to afford getting to school because of simple economics, but are super talented, or because they come from areas that don't necessarily have a lot of jobs, it's very difficult to get networked. It's a lot easier to get a job when you know people who have jobs, right? So you
Yeah.
stack these things two together, and it creates these fairly impossible odds. So the idea that most of the world's major social ills, like avoidable maternal deaths, clean water, things of that nature, yes, we can build wells. But how about even better? Let's create economies so that people can build their own wells and
Yeah.
address their own financial situation, which creates both agency and the world is now flat, so is there an opportunity to do so, but to do so in a very purposeful hiring model. So I was
Yeah.
really drawn to that because I think that uh, there are so many things systemically that can make it challenging for people to enter the workforce. And so if you don't have any shot, you've got an entire, we don't want to be in a situation where an entire kind of part of the world or population is sort of left behind because they simply lack access.
Yeah. Yeah. What great vision. And she left this world way too young, right? She passed away, and so you're
Yeah.
kind of taking the helm for her. Did you come into Sama as the CEO? Were you hired in as the CEO?
So I joined someone when we were a nonprofit.
Yeah.
So in the nonprofit parlance, she ran. There were a few different programs, nonprofit programs that she was running at the time. So I came to run or be the managing director of what is now Sama, which is this idea of doing digital hiring and hiring people, providing digital upskilling, and then providing them living wage full time employment to be kind of a first entry level position into the formal economy. So that's the position I came in to help run.
Okay. And now you're the CEO of this organization, and preparing for this interview, I read somewhere where that often as a woman CEO, you feel pressure to be rigid and inflexible. Yet you feel like the major success is from leading from empathy and self-awareness. So tell us a little bit about that internal struggle and what you experienced and how you manage it.
That's a great question. Well, as I think we just discussed, I kind of came into this role in a little bit unusual circumstances. I, came in because I was extremely passionate about showing basically that you can have a double bottom line business that companies can be a force for social good, and that was something I was very passionate about. And um, sadly, our founder, very very young, did end up passing away. So I was sort of thrust into this position. Um, in a fairly unusual circumstance. So, one of the things that I did when I first jumped into this role was, of course, I talked to every CEO I could speak to. I tried to learn and to simply
Mhm.
say, "Hey, what help me understand what the rules are, because there's a first time for everything, and how what best practices you've leveraged." I of course sought coaches, networks, talked to investors, board members, you name it. One of the things that I think came really clear to me is uh, everybody brings ourselves to work. If I just put on my CEO hat to say, okay, well, I'm going to be like, an Elon Musk or Steve Jobs style CEO, that probably, I'm not sure that I would be successful in that. So I instead sort of took approach of, hey, what are the most important attributes for success? What are the things I'm good at? What are the things I need help on? And I want to be somebody who's self-aware enough that I can not only understand who to surround myself with, meaning, what are members of the leadership team that might have skills that with complementary or maybe that I lack and that we need as a company. And then second, to be aware that whether it's your natural tendency or not, you need to be the CEO the company needs, not just today, but really tomorrow. And so, how do you do that evaluation each year to say, hey, based off of our size, stage, growth, what we're trying to achieve, am I doing the right things? Am I that right person? What do I need to focus on? And then the same, looking at the team and saying, do we have the successful combination of parts to be what the company needs us to be? So that kind of self-awareness is how I've tried to run things.
And I've heard you say that you fire yourself annually just to make sure that you're looking at things objectively.
Yeah. What does the company need? What does the company need next year? And it really, I think, forces a really good dialogue, which is you can't just keep running in motion. It's human nature to default to those things that you're good at. And what I find is, yes, I try to focus on those things, but what the company needs always needs to come first. And if that means leaning in very heavily in a certain area, then yeah, then that's what we need to do. Otherwise, we're not the right people for these jobs, right?
Right. Now you've taken this company from, as you said earlier, a nonprofit and made it into a for-profit company. So I'm sure that was quite a process. And then why did you feel that was necessary to continue the mission?
So this is something that Lala and I had spent quite a bit of time on. There's really a couple things. One is that had she been able to raise money, I think the company would have been founded as a for-profit. But a lot of people thought the idea was kind of crazy. So
Okay.
so there wasn't a lot of success on that route, which is why we actually got started originally as a nonprofit. But really idea behind why make that transition is that for companies to be successful, especially in the technology space, you need to have funding to build that technology. And in the nonprofit world, of course, there are a lot of amazing nonprofits, but when you raise money, especially as a nonprofit, um, there is a very different funders. One, there's donor fatigue, right? So you can't keep going back to the same wells. Um,
Right.
the second is that agendas change, right? It's much more of an emotional fund. Like, hey, maybe it's this year the foundation is focused on digital upskilling and underserved communities, but maybe next year it's farming, right? And then the next
Yeah.
year it's something else. And so it it is a little bit more like chasing sort of what that foundation's objective is, rather than, hey, we've got this awesome idea that will benefit, that will create business value, that will create impact, and trust, that we have this. If you believe in that vision, provide some funding so that we can then go and execute on it, right? That's the VC world where founders can come, present some great ideas, present some sound business strategy, and be held accountable for it, of course, as opposed to sort of being like I don't know, the haystack looking for the needle, which is
Yeah.
sometimes what it's like where you're trying to say, hey, we think these foundations have money, but we're not sure if our solution matches what their mission objective is, or at least the mission objective this year. And that was hard. It's also hard to where focus on and NGOs can oftentimes be will here's how much we're raising and here's how much you're distributing. Well, what we are trying to do is we are trying to create a business that creates employment, which means we need to invest in software, and engineering and sales team members, and that isn't always lined up with how foundations want to see the dollar spent, which then makes it
Yeah.
difficult to execute as a business.
Exactly. So help us, for those who are listening that are non-tech people, in a nutshell, tell us what your business does, because it's in the AI world. So tell us exactly what it does so that we can understand what you're doing from a technical perspective.
Absolutely. So all AI is built off of data. Whether that is generative AI or regular machine learning, these AI models ingest a whole bunch of data to recognize patterns and predict outcomes, like predicting the next word in a sentence. So, what we do at Sama is we are a data annotation and model evaluation solution. That means that we help take unstructured data that AI models are built on. We help structure it so that those AI models can understand how to most accurately interpret that data to build logic. So, an example of that is self-driving cars. Before a car can be driver assisted or automatically put on its brakes or stay in the lane, it needs to know what a lane looks like. So
Hmm.
you need to annotate the road signs, the lanes, so that a computer vision model can learn that and say, okay, this is what a road looks like, or this is what a pedestrian looks like. So that's a simple example. It's similar in generative AI as well. As generative AI. If you've used any of the Llama or Claude or ChatGPT or any of those, These are models that have been trained on ingesting tons and tons of data to create new content. Well, somebody needs to, some human typically at some point needs to take a look at the output of these models and say, does that make any sense? Was it accurate?
Yeah.
Did it have the right tone? Did it have the right sentiment? And so we provide both the technology as well as human in the loop workforce that helps do both the structuring of the data, but also the validation that the models are working accurately.
And to collect that data, interpret it, and put structure to it, and all that, I think another thing that's interesting to me is you say that diversity is really important in that. If it's a small room of white guys sitting there, in the U.S. making all these decisions and all this input, that's probably not the best worldwide product. So diversity is extremely important in this process.
Everybody deserves a table and deserves a seat at the table for AI. When we think about how ubiquitous the technology is, and some large companies are building the underpinnings of software that everybody else is building their software on. You
Mhm.
definitely want, you definitely want representation. And I can think of other examples. I mean, that are not AI related, but we've seen this repeat in history many a time. So, I used to work in telecom, right? And so you've got 911 operators, and if somebody's calling from a very rural area, and they're not found on the map, that could be life threatening, right? Well, that's
Right.
the data, right? So if those roads aren't mapped well, if it's to get there, take the fourth left on the street next to the post office. It's really difficult, right, for a 911 operator to then go and say, okay, well, how do I get there and administer this life-saving, um, this life-saving medical support? Well, it's the same thing with all AI and data, right? If you're missing that data, if you're missing it in an interpretable way, so maybe, Google Maps can't sort out that the fourth left on the street next to the old post office, right, is something that they
Mhm.
can direct or pinpoint on the map. That's the same idea with all AI, right? If you don't have the right data, if you don't have it structured in a way that the models can interpret, you might end up with, less than performant results.
And so to that end, you have this African connection where you employ a lot of people in that part of the world. And so tell us how that works. I mean, I think there's that, what do you call it? The informal economy where, people in that part of the world are just used to doing jobs for money, but not structured in the sense that in the US we're more accustomed to. So how do you find those people? How do you engage them in the company? Just explain that a little bit.
Sure. So, I'll start with just informal economy versus formal economy. So, almost 85% of sub-Saharan Africa is part of the informal economy. That basically means you don't have a salary, right? You don't have medical benefits. You don't get paid a guaranteed wage or have sick days. This could be things like day labor for construction. It could be having your own, food stand, selling goods. There's no sort of safety net there. So formal economy job is where you have a salary, right? You have a guarantee. If you're sick, you still get paid. So providing and making sure there are enough formal economy jobs is really important. That's really the purpose of our business. How we manage this is basically we have a website. We worked with a lot of local NGOs as well as community groups in region, and basically make the training available to anybody. So there's a waiting list. You can sign up. If you are able to successfully pass through the training, then you get called in when we have work to do. We then run people through, a kind of a next level advanced training. They pass that, then we bring them into full-time employment at living wages.
And so you do it with the living wages. So they are paid on a regular basis. They have PTO, they have benefits, they have
101
things that
days of vacation, maternity leave, paternity leave, medical, dental, vision, mental health, etc. So yeah, that's
and and in the intro we talked about how you've helped 65,000 people get to the next level, get out of poverty. So I imagine that's life changing in some of these third world countries where that's just not the norm by any means.
Yeah, exactly. When 7 out of 8 people are in that informal economy, these jobs are both really meaningful. But that was kind of the idea, is that we want to build an ecosystem. I don't want us to be the only company that's doing this kind of thing. The hope is that we build more of a technology ecosystem, so that we have a lot of alumni who've left, and some have started their own technology companies. Others have gone back to school. Many are going to school while they're working for us. So yeah, that's the entire idea.
So, how do you provide training and equipment for people? Let's just say in Africa as an example. So, do you have people on the ground there that work for your company that do the training, or is it done mostly remotely? And then I would assume that you have to provide some form of equipment for them to do those jobs.
Yeah, so in the model we have, people are coming into an office. So we have the offices we have in East Africa. They probably look more akin to offices in the Silicon Valley. So they're lots of plants, big ceilings, ping pong tables, that kind of a thing. So we find that in office is also an important part, because if you've never worked in a formal job, right? So maybe you're, like I said, selling secondhand clothes, or doing construction or something like that. It's a different thing to go into an office and to basically work a 9 to 5, right? So we find that having people come into the office. So we have these beautiful offices. They all, of course, have equipment there for people to work, training rooms, and it's a positive thing, because one, it's about getting into the formal economy, and what's it getting the computer skills and the digital skills, because the intent is really not to do annotation forever, right? It's to basically build that first time job experience at a reputable firm, so that then people can go on to higher paid jobs in other locations. So yeah, we provide that in a fairly extensive training.
So, are the leaders in that part of the world then? Are they Americans that have been placed there to make that happen, or do you train and grow leaders from the areas that you're located?
Are absolutely from the areas located. So
Okay.
99% of the team members are, if you're working in our, office in Kenya, are Kenyan. If you're working in our offices in Uganda, are Ugandan. Yeah.
And then how do you, I'm really intrigued about that because then how do you create the culture that you want to create with such diverse experiences and parts of the world and whatever? So how do you create that culture that you'd like to see in your company?
Yeah, so we've been around now for almost 15 years, and we when we first launched, we did have some people who are familiar with both, technology. Basically, we had a small office that we started in Nairobi with some expats, basically
Mhm.
some people from the Silicon Valley, um, in conjunction with some people from a couple of universities. So that's really how we got started. Was with a small office, and then basically we built the ecosystem. So first we seeded it a bit, right, with some talent. We built our methodologies. We had to invest for a number of years to basically kind of build and grow our talent. Now, the exciting thing is we're one of the largest employers, so now folks are like, "Oh, you work at Sama," and we have that reputation now. But to your point, it took time at the beginning to really build and invest in that. So we had team members who had extensive, delivery operations and engineering experience, spending a lot of time in East Africa. So some of our initial leaders moved over to establish the system and the infrastructure. And then we did something similar in Uganda. So Nairobi was our first office, but then when we moved to both Kampala and Uganda, we had asked some of our experienced resources who were in Kenya to basically move, right, and support launching of the new offices. And so we provided support until we could basically have enough infrastructure in place. And now, in terms of Uganda and Kenya, we've been there for quite some time. That the Ugandan leaders are all Ugandan, and the Kenyan leaders are all Kenyan.
So how many employees do you have company-wide and how many in the US compared to other parts of the world?
It's very interesting. So in many ways, we look like a regular startup. where it's like, oh, you have about 90, 100 people. Well, that's outside of East Africa. So that is, engineers, salespeople, myself, our CFO, et cetera. But then our teams in East Africa are over 3,000.
Okay.
Like a
Okay.
large scale operation there, and then a little startup in
Yeah.
all other respects.
And then the foundation that's part of this still holds the majority ownership of the company. So yeah, that keeps you on your mission and keeps you doing what you want to do. So did you come up with that structure? And was obviously that was intentional. So what's the theory behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. When we were making the transition, one of the transition from nonprofit to for-profit, we wanted to make sure that there was a structure in which we could have sort of belt and suspenders, if you will, to ensure that we stayed true to our North Star of our mission. So we basically created, we could think of it as almost like a subsidiary of the nonprofit, that all of the for-profit assets were transitioned to in exchange for ownership, for stock equity. So
Okay.
that is why our foundation remains the largest shareholder, and that was for really a couple things. One is governance. So the foundation gets a seat on the board and gets to be involved in ensuring that the decisions and the direction of the company are staying true to our mission. The second is that there's alignment when we are able to drive, success as a business value and impact value. That's the ultimate sort of holy grail. So we now have alignment in terms of what the interests are, meaning the nonprofit is also trying to make sure that we can grow and drive business value as well, which is important because from a social mission standpoint, we need to drive revenue to create jobs. So it's very, very aligned.
Right.
We need to be competitive and have good software to be able to sell more work. So it was a very good balance to where we could have both input from the nonprofit at the board level, alignment with the nonprofit. There so wasn't any conflict between what investors would want and the nonprofit would want. And then we filled the rest of our kind of our cap table, our investors with impact investors and a couple of traditional investors. So for our purpose of not just the foundation and what we have already operationalized, we have impact reporting metrics that need to be reported to our investors, just like financial metrics.
Okay, so I understand how that works. And then what does the foundation or the nonprofit side, what do they support? Do they raise money to what is their mission? I mean, I see the profit side where you're trying to create jobs, you're trying to create this AI product, and you're working with corporate business world. But what does the foundation do outside of the fact that they kind of are the majority leader, majority owner of the business?
So the nonprofit's goal is to basically create employment in sub-Saharan Africa. And so the nonprofit runs a program that we call the Give Work Challenge. So the Give Work Challenge is a business grant, basically both a program to support impact entrepreneurs, but also basically supports and funds different impact startups in the region of East Africa. And so it was actually started because Sama wouldn't have existed if we didn't get a grant from the Dutch Postal Code Lottery all those years ago. And so it was the
Mhm.
same idea was let's basically provide business grants to, great startups. But the lens of the focus is impact. So it's in region. So are we starting a business in Kenya or in Uganda? Are you an impact entrepreneur? So we started this with basically opening this up to our own associates, saying, hey, if you want to start a business, like here, we will support you, provide the mentorship, the funding, and it's a real business competition. We've since opened it up to impact entrepreneurs outside of SAMA employees, but yeah, it's a lot of fun, and been some pretty incredible businesses that have come about. So it's all part of kind of building this broader ecosystem.
Yeah, and it's an interesting theory too, because that's you're basically saying, you can start a side hustle, or you can start this new business, which means that person may leave your organization, maybe even compete with you in some ways. So, that's a pretty visionary thing to do, and a lot of people aren't willing to do that because of what they think they might lose as opposed to what they might gain.
Our whole goal has been about how do you create an ecosystem? How do you create jobs? And so for this was really coming full circle. And also to your point, speaking of side hustle, like everybody's got a side hustle. It's an
Yeah.
incredibly entrepreneurial community in both Kenya and Uganda. And so you're in, it's really funny. So I do focus groups. So every time I'm in East Africa often, probably 4 or 5 times a year. And one of my favorite things to do is just to check in with people. Of course, there's always business to run, and it's where all of our operations are. But I was sitting in this focus group where we just get to know each other, right? Like, and would love to hear, uh, what you've been up to. And then I always have a question around, what your side hustle is. So you're gonna laugh, Steve. I'm sitting in this small focus group, where we're just catching up. I meet somebody who says, "Hey, I've started a party, rental company. So we, rent out like plastic chairs for gatherings." I'm like, "Oh, that's really cool." The next person, I'm like, "So what's your side hustle?" He's like, "Well, I'm a DJ." I was like, "Yeah, that's fantastic." Next person, "Oh, I decided to launch a chicken butchery." Next person says, "I actually have I make chicken coops." Another person says they sell chips. So you get through this entire thing, and we're like, you could actually have a walking like party in a box. You've got the DJ,
Yeah.
the chairs, the party, the chicken and chips, the source of the food. Yeah, it was pretty incredible. So that was
Yes.
all. That was just in one random, selection of employees just to catch up. So yeah, it's very, very entrepreneurial, and we love to both see that spirit, and that's kind of the intent. Is that we focused on digital because there are so many needs digitally, right? So you can have customers in the U.S. and in Europe create jobs in the East Africa region, which is fantastic. But let's not forget that we want to create jobs in regions. We can build the technical skills, build those ecosystems. It'd be incredible, and whether it's a non-digital business like party rentals or to digital businesses. So we've had some alumni, and we consider this a super positive success. They've been funded by the Give Work Challenge, and then they leave because their business are successful. We're like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
It's like a super positive thing. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And how do you, like in the bio we talked about, your company is responsible for raising 65,000 people out of poverty. How do you
It's
measure that?
70,000 now.
70,000. So how do you measure that? And how do you know, that's an impressive number. So you have 3,000 employees, yet you've helped 70,000 people. So explain that.
Sure, sure. So we've hired almost 18, 20,000 people since our inception. They support an average of three dependents with their incomes from Sama. So we measure all that. We have a team that is focused on impact. So when we started as a nonprofit, one of the things that we did up front was much like people report on earnings, we used to have these learnings calls where we would talk about our impact. So we've treated the tracking of impact just like we've treated our financial metrics, right? Where we say, hey, here's a target, here's what we're going to hold ourselves accountable to. Um, and we track it, and then we try to learn from it. Like, what do we do right? What do we do wrong? Because you need to constantly evaluate your theory of change as to whether or not it's still impactful or not. Like, are you still solving the right problem? And
Yeah.
so that is an approach we've taken from the beginning. So we have uh, a small but mighty team that tracks and manages all the data. So um, we have rubrics for impact hires, which are really around, the World Bank standard for household income, un and underemployment. So we have a rubric in which we're capturing things, and then we also capture what these same metrics are post SAMA. We try to take a look at long-term career paths, so people who have positive attritions who've gone on to higher paying jobs. Well, where did they go and what was their success, right? So how do we
Hmm.
take these learnings to make sure we can build them into the program, much like the discipline that's being put on financials, right? Which is, you know what our conversion rates look like, what areas of the market are we having success in and not. We take the same approach.
Yeah, yeah, it's really impressive, and I know that there's that feeling that there's been billions of dollars invested into Africa and other parts of the world as far as aid, but sometimes you question whether that's helpful or not. Obviously it helps people in the short term, but is it sustainable, and does it help building? And this seems much more like you're investing in that sustainability of communities learning and being able to help themselves.
It's 100% right. So, there's been over $1 trillion of aid that has flown into Africa from Western countries since the 1960s.
Hmm.
Mm. But can you guess how much the GDP has changed?
Yeah,
None,
yeah,
zero. And
yeah.
so the real key is truly believe is that level of financial independence and infrastructure that is really necessary. And what a lot of people don't know is that there will be more working age people in sub-Saharan Africa than all of Europe in the course of the next couple of decades. It's the
Mhm.
fastest growing population on Earth, the youngest population, a population that's mobile first, right? So they didn't grow up with landlines and infrastructure. And if you think about it from that perspective, the world is a global economy. There are hundreds of millions of jobs that need to be created in region, both for financial stability, growth, and support. And we don't want to be, the wrong solution is, well, let's just figure out this aid thing. So if there's a deficit, let's just keep going on. Or it's a, how can we create, the right sort of financial independence? But governments certainly can't do it all. So there are going to be some companies like ours that say, hey, let's create value in region.
Yeah, yeah, it makes total sense. Another thing I noticed too, when you said that, when you're hiring people, you purposely look for people's potential of impact, not necessarily their skills. So, to a lot of people that are in the hiring process, they would think, well, that's kind of a backwards way to look at it. But what does that mean, and how do you do that?
Yeah, that's it is not the way that people traditionally hire, right? You think about every
Yeah.
position you've hired for, it's like, oh, if they're a software engineer, what kind of a degree did they have, and what sort of experience do they have? And so we really look at ourselves as kind of a first time formal employer, which is this is why these are entry level jobs, right? These are not software engineering jobs. These are jobs that are both trainable, but that's the entire idea is imagine if you never had that opportunity to even access the workforce where you kind of might be. So this is, I guess you could think of it as a sort of akin to, I don't know, affirmative action or other things like that. And I know some people hate that term, some people like that term, but the idea is if there wasn't a purposeful look to say, hey, um, maybe we should kind of widen our net, then we may never be able to support or see all this incredible talent that exists. So this is really just leveling the playing field by providing access to people who've got huge barriers. Because if it was only people that you took from the top 1 or 2% at that university, you're not really solving this financial independence and employment issue. How do you create an ecosystem of people working in tech if there's like less than a percent, who can work there? And I'll give maybe more of a potentially relatable example. So, tied back to AI. So, there was a kind of a famous disaster that happened a few years ago where Amazon built an AI based recruiting tool to automate the search process for engineers. Okay, so it took a look at all the database of engineers and it inferred, because all AI is based off of patterns, that women weren't qualified software engineers. So as any women would start coming through the system, I was like, nope, nope, nope. Why?
Wow.
Probably because about 90 or 80% of the applicants in that database were men, right?
Yeah. Right.
No ding on it, but that's kind of the point is if you so many sort of systems and things are kind of in place to, just recognize people who've been there before. That's not a problem. But if you're really trying to open things up, you need to take a purposeful push towards this. And these are entry level positions. So we basically said, hey, we're going to hire on the basis of impact. We have built some fantastic software. We've got really, really good training programs to basically help unlock people's potential. And then, yeah, we're we're hiring on this basis because the entire goal is to upskill and be able to bring people into the formal economy, and jobs beget jobs. So once you have that on your CV and you've built that good technical experience, or just people skills and communication and time management and all the other things that are really important to be successful, you go from, kind of looking 2 feet in front of you to actually thinking about a longer term career. So that's the entire idea is
Yeah.
jobs beget jobs. You get that on your CV. Wow, that work experience means a lot. And you can now go on and either, you've got enough money in your pocket to go back to school or join one of our scholarship programs. Um, Beyond that, you've got incredible work experience that makes you a great professional and unlocks, the future of your career.
And I think I read that 53% of your workforce is women, and that was intentional, that you wanted it, you wanted to, again, to make it more diverse. And so you purposely, wanted to get more women in the workforce.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's originally interesting when we originally launched and founded this business. Uh, we looked at, okay, what are people who've got the greatest barriers to employment? And it was definitely people in underserved communities and women in particular. And we also know that when women succeed, communities succeed. They tend to contribute, to supporting kids going through school or contribute back to the community. So that was kind of the idea is, hey, we should be purposeful about this. One, because they have some of the greatest barriers to employment, but two, when women succeed, communities get uplifted. So we did take
Yeah.
a purposeful approach, and we've tried to carry that forward all the way through to the top level. So yes, our company is 53% female, or identifying as female, and that basically goes up to the top,
Yeah, that's
not just at
fantastic.
our impact level.
So someone who has a direct impact and influence on AI in the AI world, what's your is kind of a big question, but what's AI of the future? Are you very positive of it? Are you one that is worried about it? What's AI going to look like in the next couple decades?
Well, I think it's an incredibly powerful technology that is almost reinventing itself like every few months. Like the pace of change and the adoption has been absolutely insane. And AI can absolutely be a force for good. There's some pretty incredible applications out there, like food scarcity is one of the problems that probably will be solved through AI. So intelligent, crop disease detection for targeted pesticides and targeted fertilizer to solve some of these really big challenges. So there's a lot of good that can come about it. But there also needs to be a way in which it's developed responsibly. So I'm a big believer in responsible AI frameworks. So I like to think of it as, and a responsible AI is really a, how are you developing your AI models? Are you developing them responsibly? And it's not just responsible or ethical. It's actually things like data governance. So when you built your model, for example, let's just use a autonomous vehicle. If you only use data on, California Highway 101, and you expected it to drive somewhere in the Midwest, that wouldn't be a very good representative sample of the data, right? Or
Yeah,
in China, or in the UK, or, in different, or if you only did it when it was sunny and not rainy. So data governance and sort of like bias can exist in every application. And so part of responsible AI is, did you actually think thoughtfully about all the data that is really necessary to make sure your model is fit for purpose? But the other components are, do you have a way in which you can evaluate what it looks like? So what does good look like in your model? If you can't answer that question, that's really challenging. So I look at it as measure twice, cut once, right? Uh, we've seen it before when companies build softwares and then it was like, oh yeah, we got to worry about data privacy. It's like
yeah.
try to come back and re-architect your platform for like,
Right.
oh, yeah, we kind of got to worry about, data privacy and things of that nature, or cybersecurity. So it's really this idea of being able to enable developers who are building these models to say, hey, there's a right way to do it. Think about these things. It's never perfect. It's always going to be iterative. But if you think about things like your data, your security, how you're actually building it, do you have diverse people, diverse data sources that are developing this? We will end up with better, more performant AI. And in cases where it's really minor, like small specific applications, maybe it's not a big deal. You don't want to slow down the pace of innovation. But think about things like financial systems.
Hmm.
Wow. I would
Yeah.
hope that we take a pretty good look at the appropriate guardrails in place, because you don't want to end up with AI powered financial systems that, for example, exclude lending to certain people, right?
Yeah.
Be pretty terrible.
For sure. For sure. Well, Wendy, in anticipation of our discussion today, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to be sure and get into the program today before we wind down?
I think you've covered I think the full gamut. I probably would just land maybe by saying that um, I know we spent quite a bit of time talking about, this social business, and I'd say that it is possible. In fact, it's more than possible to have a business that can create value for your investors and your employees and can do good in the world. It's hard, but it is 100% possible. And I think the more that you can create alignment, there can be incredible success, and society will be all the better for it. And if anybody has any interest in exploring this, I've got about a million lessons learned, so I'd be more than happy to share any of those.
That's awesome. I mean, wouldn't that be perfect, right? Successful businesses that also do good in the world. That's the holy grail, I would think. So for sure. So Wendy, at this time in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Gosh, what I would say in terms of leadership is probably where we started, which is to not be afraid of what you don't know. I think it's a real common fallacy, especially as people move their way up their ranks, to believe that it's important to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, it's quite the opposite. You want to have people around, to surround yourself with people who are very smart, to continue to be intellectually curious, to listen and learn, because there's always going to be some new or next technology. And so that level of self-awareness and continuous curiosity, I think, is actually probably one of the most important aspects of leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well, if people are more interested in Sama and yourself and this industry, how can they find you and just give us a little information.
www.sama.com.
Okay, that makes it work easy. Well, Wendy, this has been a great conversation. When I was introduced to you, I just thought your mission and what you're doing just really resonated with me, and I thought, wow, this is somebody that we need to hear from, and it's just really impressive. So I appreciate all you're doing. I kind of feel like you're doing a lot of, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of good in the world, a lot of God's work. So that's impressive. So keep doing what you're doing. I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you continue to have an impact on those communities that you're having now. It's really impressive.
Thank you, Steve. Much appreciated.
Okay, well, take care. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you down the road.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orange, the word, .coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.